Imagine you're, I don't know, in your late 30s or early 40s.
Right, like peak of your career, usually.
Exactly. Peak career, maybe you're managing a family, and then suddenly you just completely lose the ability to endure a standard bus ride.
Right.
Or like you suddenly can't organize your inbox anymore.
It just vanishes.
Yeah. And for decades, medicine has basically called this depression or burnout or just, getting older. But today we are looking at data that proves it is, well, it's actually none of those things.
No, it's not. We're looking at a really fundamental, highly measurable collision between shifting hormones and underlying brain chemistry. And for millions of women out there, just recognizing this collision is the difference between losing their independence and actually reclaiming their lives.
Right. But because usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this, there's an expectation of precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor points at it. Broken or not broken.
Clean and visible. Very comforting.
Super comforting. But when you step into the world of neurodevelopment and hormones and the aging brain, that standard x-ray machine is completely useless. We're operating in a diagnostic landscape that is just incredibly murky.
Yeah, because the tools we typically use in medicine simply weren't designed to measure the cascading effects of hormones on a neurodivergent nervous system. Because they are, invisible to standard blood panels, these effects just get entirely mislabeled.
So whether you are navigating this transition yourself, or you're supporting someone who is, or honestly, if you just want to understand how the brain actually works, this deep dive is for you. We are asking one specific, really urgent question today.
The big one.
Yep. Why do late-diagnosed neurodivergent women, specifically those with ADHD and autism, often experience a sudden, severe crisis of executive dysfunction during perimenopause?
And the answers we're finding in the sources today are, honestly, paradigm shifting. The crisis these women experience isn't a sudden loss of capability. It's not a character flaw. It's strictly biology.
To get to the bottom of this, we've pulled together an amazing stack of sources. We're looking at a massive 2025 population-based cohort study from European psychiatry.
Oh, it's fascinating.
So good. We've also got expert insights from the UK Adult ADHD Network, some recently published clinical data on estrogen receptors in the brain, and this is important, raw, first-hand accounts from community forums like the National Autistic Society.
Because the clinical data needs that human context.
Exactly. So to truly grasp the magnitude of this crisis, we really need to start at the biological foundation, right? Like, what is physically changing in the architecture of the brain when perimenopause begins?
Right. And for the longest time, medicine treated estrogen almost exclusively as a reproductive hormone.
Like ovaries, pregnancy, menstrual cycle.
Exactly. But estrogen is actually a master regulator in the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier super easily, and the brain is just packed with estrogen receptors, specifically in regions like the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the brain's executive functioning center, right?
Yep. Responsible for planning, organizing, impulse control. And also in the hippocampus, which is your memory and learning center.
So in a neurotypical brain, when estrogen levels begin to wildly fluctuate and eventually just drop during perimenopause, it causes some predictable disruption. Women experience brain fog, forgetfulness, some mood swings.
The brain is basically reacting to the sudden withdrawal of a highly potent neuroprotective hormone.
Let's ground the science in something tangible for a second. Think of the ADHD brain as a manufacturing factory that constantly struggles to produce enough dopamine.
It's always a little behind on its daily quota.
Right, always behind. And estrogen acts as the factory manager. She's the one rushing around, optimizing the assembly line, making sure the dopamine receptors are highly sensitive, and actively catching whatever limited dopamine is actually produced.
She's keeping the lights on.
Exactly. So when perimenopause hits and the manager just leaves the building, the whole factory just grinds to a halt.
That's such a perfect analogy because estrogen directly supports dopamine synthesis. It increases the density of those dopamine receptors. It even slows down the breakdown of serotonin and modulates acetylcholine, which is critical for memory.
Wow.
Yeah, so if your factory was already struggling to meet the dopamine quota, losing that manager isn't just an inconvenience, it's literally catastrophic for daily functioning.
And we see this mirrored directly in the sources. Like, Dr. James Cousteau, a consultant psychiatrist, frames ADHD primarily as a disorder of regulation.
Right. It's not just a deficit of attention.
Exactly. It is an inability to regulate attention, emotions, impulses, sleep, energy, all of it. Take away the estrogen, and that delicate regulation just shatters entirely.
And the hard data finally proves how severe this shattering actually is. That 2025 study by Yusuf Smari and colleagues looked at over 5,000 women.
That is a massive sample size.
It really is. And severe perimenopausal symptoms were present in 54.2% of women with ADHD.
Over half.
Over half. Compare that to just 30.1% of women without ADHD. And the most alarming detail here is that the peak difference in symptom severity occurred early between the ages of 35 and 39.
Wait, okay. If estrogen drops in all women during perimenopause, why wouldn't neurotypical women experience this exact same crash in executive function? Like, why is the neurodivergent brain uniquely vulnerable to this specific drop?
Well, it really comes down to baseline reserves. A neurotypical brain has a surplus buffer of dopamine and robust executive function pathways.
Like a savings account.
Yes, exactly like a savings account. When their estrogen drops, they might experience a, say, 20% dip in cognitive efficiency. They feel foggy, sure, but they have enough reserve dopamine to just continue functioning.
I see.
But an ADHD brain is essentially living paycheck to paycheck with its neurotransmitters. So a 20% dip pushes them into a severe deficit. They cross the threshold from, struggling to completely unable to function.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And that explains the early onset, too. If you are already running on fumes, even the earliest, mildest hormonal fluctuations of perimenopause in your late 30s are going to trigger a systemic alarm.
Exactly.
The dopamine factory shuts down a whole decade before society tells women to even start looking out for menopause.
So the chemical scaffolding basically dissolves, but, biology is really only half the story here.
Right.
The real tragedy happens when you look at how these women have been surviving up until this point. Like, what happens to their behavioral coping mechanisms?
Right. This is the concept of the buffer, or masking, that we saw in the literature.
Yeah.
For a neurodivergent woman who hasn't been diagnosed, she has likely spent her entire life using high estrogen levels, sheer willpower, and incredibly strict, exhausting routines to just mask her neurodivergence.
She's built this intricate buffer to navigate a world that is fundamentally not designed for her brain.
Yeah, she is passing as neurotypical, but the cost of entry is chronic, low-level stress every single day.
And then perimenopause arrives. The chemical scaffolding just drops out from underneath her. But look at the environmental factors colliding with this biological shift.
Right, the midlife.
Midlife often represents peak cognitive load. You're balancing career advancement, maybe raising teenagers, caring for aging parents, managing the invisible logistical labor of a household.
The demands on the nervous system are at an absolute all-time high, precisely when the internal buffer is depleted. It's so unfair.
It's the worst timing imaginable.
So let me ask a crucial clarifying question here. Is their ADHD or autism actually getting clinically worse during this time? Like, if you put them in an fMRI, has the condition mutated?
No, that's a huge misconception. The underlying neurodivergence isn't worsening or progressing like a degenerative disease. Autism doesn't get worse.
Okay, so what's happening?
What changes drastically is the cost of coping. The neurodivergent traits were always there, the sensory sensitivities, the need for routine, the executive function challenges. But the physiological resources required to suppress or manage them, those are gone. Autistic burnout is often defined in the clinical literature as exactly this, a chronic mismatch between demands and available supports.
And the intersection of autism and perimenopause in these sources is incredibly intense. The loss of estrogen leads to highly intensified sensory sensitivities. Things physically feel louder, brighter, and just rougher to the nervous system.
It's a sensory nightmare. And there's also a marked increase in atypical interoception.
Wait, interoception, that's your brain's ability to perceive internal bodily signals, right?
Right. It's how you know when you're hungry or when you're overheating or when your heart is racing. Autistic individuals frequently experience atypical interoception from childhood. Their brain might struggle to categorize those internal signals accurately.
So when perimenopause introduces sudden hot flashes, random heart palpitations, wildly fluctuating internal temperatures, the brain is completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. It can't map these bizarre new physical sensations, so it just registers profound panic and dysregulation.
It's literally interpreting a hot flash as a mortal threat.
Yes. And we see the human cost of this dysregulation in the community forums. The clinical data only tells us the what, but these lived experiences tell us the how.
Right. There's a post we pulled from the National Autistic Society forum that is just devastating to read. A user named Stressed Penguin, who is 47 years old, describes how her sensory sensitivities amplified to an unbearable degree after age 40.
Her account is so powerful.
Yeah, she writes, let me find the quote. She writes, "I can barely take a bus ride due to the insane amount of smell and noise, despite headphones and other ways of protecting myself. I cannot eat in a restaurant. I cannot work anymore."
That's just completely debilitating.
It really is. She goes on to say, "I have problems eating because I am insanely focused on the details of the food." And she ends the post terrified of the future, noting that she is only approaching menopause.
She is losing her independence. A standard bus ride becomes an agonizing assault on her nervous system. This is a fundamental, terrifying shift in how she processes the world.
And naturally, when a woman experiences this level of collapse, when she can no longer work or navigate public transit, she seeks medical help. She goes to her doctor.
Which plunges her directly into the second major crisis, the diagnostic maze.
Oh, this part of the research is so frustrating. Because of how our medical system has historically viewed both women's health and neurodivergence, she is basically walking into a trap of overlapping symptoms.
If you draw a Venn diagram of perimenopause, ADHD, and autistic burnout, you essentially just have a single circle.
Just one circle.
Right. Severe brain fog, memory issues, mood swings, sleep disturbances, irritability. These are hallmark symptoms of all three conditions.
Yet up to 75% of women with ADHD aren't diagnosed until adulthood, often not until their 40s or 50s, because the diagnostic tools for ADHD and autism were historically calibrated around how these conditions present in young, hyperactive boys.
Right, the classic stereotype.
Yep. If a patient didn't fit that highly specific externalized profile in childhood, they fell through the cracks. Females tend to internalize their symptoms. They present as inattentive, chronically anxious, or intensely perfectionistic as a coping mechanism.
So when a 45-year-old woman finally sits in her doctor's office, exhausted, unable to organize her inbox, having panic attacks on the bus, the medical system evaluates her through a very narrow lens.
They just see a standard psychiatric crisis.
Exactly. They diagnose severe depression, generalized anxiety disorder, or alarmingly often borderline personality disorder. They see the smoke, but they misidentify the fire entirely.
It's like trying to fix a car with a dead battery because the radio won't turn on, while completely missing that the alternator, the estrogen, has stopped charging the system.
That is a great way to look at it.
Like you can temporarily jumpstart the mood with a standard SSRI antidepressant, which targets serotonin, but the battery's just going to drain again tomorrow because the underlying dopamine factory is still shut down.
Right, and the neurodivergent sensory threshold is still completely breached. You are treating the symptom of the collapse, not the structural cause.
And the literature actually refers to this as the perfect storm. An unrecognized neurodevelopmental condition collides with a major hormonal transition, and it's evaluated by a medical system that often lacks specialized training in the intersection of female neurodivergence and menopause care.
It is a perfect storm. But, we've outlined this massive systemic problem. Let's move into the solutions.
Yes, please. How do we fix the alternator? When a listener realizes this is happening to them, or maybe their partner, how do they actually reclaim control over their brain chemistry?
The profound biological connection here provides a very clear roadmap for treatment. The first avenue highlighted in the sources is hormone replacement therapy, or HRT.
Okay, so adding the estrogen back in.
Exactly. By stabilizing estrogen levels through HRT, you stabilize the foundation of the dopamine support system. It essentially brings the factory manager back into the building.
Which eases the cognitive load and reduces the severity of the executive dysfunction.
Right.
But HRT isn't a magic wand that cures ADHD or autism, though.
No, definitely not a cure. It simply restores the baseline scaffolding that the person relied on for their first 35 years. It gets them back to their normal.
Okay, so once that baseline is restored, what's next?
Medication adjustments become the crucial next step for those with ADHD. Because hormonal changes physically alter how effective stimulant medications are in the brain. A dose that worked perfectly at age 30 might be entirely ineffective at age 42.
Wait, really? The medication just stops working?
Yeah, it can. The clinical data points to specific medications, like lisdexamfetamine, potentially offering more stable cognitive improvement for perimenopausal women.
Why that one specifically?
Because it is a prodrug, meaning it requires the body's metabolism to convert it into the active stimulant. It can provide a smoother, more sustained delivery of dopamine that helps mitigate the erratic peaks and valleys caused by fluctuating hormones.
Wow, that answers a massive question for so many people. If you've been on the same medication for a decade and it suddenly feels like you're taking a placebo, you aren't imagining things.
No, you're not. Your hormones have changed the playing field, and your medication needs to be recalibrated to match the new environment.
Which leads directly into a strategy the sources call cycle-aware management.
Cycle-aware management is honestly arguably one of the most empowering tools a neurodivergent person can adopt. It means rigorously tracking your executive function and sensory symptoms alongside your hormonal fluctuations.
What does that actually look like in practice, though? Like on a random Tuesday?
It means keeping a log of your basal body temperature or your cycle days right next to your daily executive function rating. You start to notice patterns.
Okay.
Perhaps on days 21 through 28 of your cycle, your working memory falls off a cliff due to the natural progesterone spike and estrogen drop. Instead of white-knuckling through it and feeling like a failure, you anticipate it. You shift your major project deadlines away from that week. You artificially increase your external scaffolding.
Like setting more alarms or relying heavily on visual checklists or just delegating tasks.
Exactly. You might even work with your prescriber to slightly adjust your stimulant dose exclusively during that specific luteal window. You are managing your environment to match your biology rather than forcing your biology to meet impossible environmental demands.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
But what if HRT isn't medically an option for someone? Or if their nervous system is just too fried to even start a tracking journal? What are the non-medical interventions? How do you physically support a brain that feels like it's operating on an alien frequency?
Then we have to look at neuroplasticity, the brain's physical ability to form new neural connections. When estrogen drops, we lose a natural promoter of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
BDNF.
Yes, think of BDNF as high-grade fertilizer for new neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, but if I am drowning in a sensory meltdown on a bus, telling me to do some mindfulness breathing feels a bit like throwing a cup of water on a house fire.
Oh, it absolutely does, if we are just talking about general relaxation.
Right.
But we are talking about forcing a physiological override. The stress of failing executive functions and sensory overload causes your body to pump out cortisol. And cortisol is actively toxic to BDNF. It literally destroys your brain's fertilizer.
Yeah, wow. So you're sabotaging your own brain repair.
Exactly. So targeted lifestyle strategies like resonance frequency breathwork or specific meditation practices aren't about calming down. They are biological tools used to immediately halt cortisol production.
Ah, I see.
By stopping the cortisol spike, you create an environment where whatever BDNF you have left can actually work to reinforce the prefrontal cortex and stabilize your executive function. It is a biochemical intervention.
You are systematically lowering the stress hormone so the brain can repair its own hardware. That is incredible.
Yeah.
And the sources make it clear that protecting sleep is a non-negotiable part of this repair process, too.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
Because perimenopause heavily disrupts sleep architectures. And chronic sleep deprivation acts like gasoline on the fire of both executive dysfunction and sensory overload.
But, you know, beyond the breathwork and the sleep hygiene, the most vital non-medical intervention discussed in the literature is a psychological shift.
Right, the self-blame.
Yes, it is the active reduction of self-blame. When a woman understands the physiological mechanics of this transition, when she can visualize her dopamine receptors being starved of estrogen, she can stop telling herself that she is lazy or broken or suddenly failing at life.
The biological data fundamentally takes the shame out of the equation. Late-diagnosed neurodivergent women are not failing at midlife. They are experiencing a profound, measurable biological shift where plummeting estrogen is removing the critical scaffolding that held their dopamine production and their lifelong coping mechanisms together.
And understanding this intersection gives you the specific clinical vocabulary needed to walk into a doctor's office and advocate for yourself in a medical system that is, frankly, still catching up to the science.
Yeah. When you know why the bus ride is suddenly unbearable, or why the inbox is insurmountable, you can demand the right kind of diagnostic lens.
It changes everything. We started this deep dive by talking about the X-ray machine. How frustrating it is when the diagnostic landscape is murky, when we can't just point to a clean, broken bone.
Right.
The intersection of female hormones and neurodivergence has been invisible to standard tests for decades, leading to an entire generation of misdiagnosed women.
But as the clinical data improves, that invisibility is finally fading. We are learning to measure the previously unmeasurable.
Which leaves us with a really lingering thought to mull over. If a biological transition like shifting estrogen can completely unmask a lifetime of hidden
Which
neurodivergence.
we know too can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If hormones can entirely rewrite how a brain interacts with the sensory world, how many other standard psychological crises in our society are actually just biological transitions?
Oh, that's a huge question. Like, how many cases of midlife burnout or sudden intractable anxiety are simply metabolic or hormonal shifts that we just haven't built the right X-ray machine to measure yet? Maybe the patients aren't broken. Maybe medicine has just been taking pictures of the wrong things entirely.
That is a profound question to consider as we rethink how we evaluate human behavior in aging.
Something to think about while you navigate your own transitions or support the people around you. Keep asking questions, keep advocating for your brain, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.